day. He's had more than 40 surgeries just to stay alive. And much of his team has died from cleaning up depleted uranium on the highway of death in Iraq. He wrote the Army's DU handbook, and I don't have time to go over his 5-page bio, but Dr. Doug Rokke is a depleted uranium expert. He earned his BS in physics following his MS and PhD in physics and technology education. His military career has spanned now up to 5 decades, to include combat duty during Vietnam War and Gulf War I. Doug served as a member of the 3rd U.S. Army Medical Command Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical NBC Teaching, Medical Response, and Special Operations Team, 3rd U.S. Army Captured Equipment Project Team, and the 3rd U.S. Army Depleted Uranium Assessment Team during Gulf War Operation Desert Storm. He was the U.S. Army Depleted Uranium Project Director of the entire program in 94-95. He developed the congressionally mandated education and training materials, wrote the U.S. Army Regulation 700-48, U.S. Army PAM 748, U.S. Army Command Task for DU Incidents, or Common Task. Doug has taught nuclear, biological, chemical warfare, hazardous materials, and emergency medicine for 20 years to police all over the country and civilians. He has been an advisor, on-screen expert for numerous television documentaries. I just can't even cover it all. Dr. Doug has taught undergraduate and graduate courses in environmental science, environmental engineering, nuclear physics, emergency management, and was a staff physicist at the University of Illinois. And I just can't even go over it before he retired. He serves as the advisor of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. National Academy of Sciences, U.S. Institute of Medicines, U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Department of Transportation, U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, U.S. Department of U.S. Defense, General Accounting Office, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, British Royal Society, British House of Lords of Commons, United Nations, U.S. President Clinton Presidential Oversight Board. I mean, I can't even do the whole deal. The point is, he is the expert, Dr. DU. And you wrote the book on what it does, but I mean, tell us what it did to you personally.
Well, what first happened, we got the rash and the respiratory stuff. Within 2 to 3 years, as I'm going back on active duty as the director of the U.S. Army Depleted Uranium Project to write the training, the regulations, and our procedures. The kidney problems are already there. Had probably 20 kidney surgeries.
That's what the troops keep telling me. It messes up their kidneys and urinary tract. How many surgeries you have, sir?
About 20.
20? Okay, please continue.
And then we had all the respiratory problems, calcified granulomas in the lungs, the radiation cataracts. I've already had the eye surgery in the left eye, and they're trying to postpone the eye surgery in the right eye because the surgery is just a nightmare, and it takes months and months of recovery, and it's so dangerous. Thing we've had happen, and again, I have more phone calls and emails on it again in the last 48 hours, is because of decalcification and dephosphorylation of the bones in the teeth. You fracture bones all over the place, and then your teeth just literally, they disintegrate and fall out, and so my teeth are gone. And then, obviously, you have all the other neurological problems, the neuromuscular problems, and we're seeing hundreds of thousands of U.S. military, totally confirmed by the Department of Veterans Affairs, with all the same problems. I mean, it has just turned into a complete nightmare. Members of my team developed cancer and died. We had a friendly fire guy, absolute friendly fire, Desert Storm 1 in a Bradley fighting vehicle. They're still, to this day, I got the message from him on the other day, okay? And he still was denied medical care after 20 years. 20 years that he was in a Bradley fighting vehicle where an Abrams gunner shot it up with a 120-millimeter DU round. He still can't get medical care. And then the widows of my guys that have died, they've just all but abandoned them.
And now we just got numbers by the British Medical Journal and others, 14 times the regular cancer rate in Fallujah, 3 to 4 times in the troops that fought there. I mean, that is a nuclear war zone. And now they've gone from admitting DU's bad to just saying, everybody, have a party. It's fun.
People won't acknowledge it because the foundation of everything they believed and what they trusted literally collapses. And then their life goes and shatters. Well, try living it 365 days a year for 40 years. I'm going back to my Agent Orange days and realize what is happening and try to get it done for myself. And I had to put this stuff together, but get it done for these kids that don't know, and they don't have access. They don't know who to call. They don't know how to get help.
And what we learned when we did the research, that the contamination was so extensive that you could not clean it up. What we learned with working with the radiological equipment assigned by the U.S. Army, assigned by the Department of Energy, is that you could not effectively quantify or even find the contamination. It couldn't be done.
So the troops are literally firing toxic waste radiation guns. I mean, you talk about Buck Rogers, Martian's land, and they're firing radiation blocks. I mean, literally just, I mean, Darth Vader stormtroopers wouldn't be that stupid. I mean, they're literally firing radiation guns.
That's correct. And see, that when I did the work at the Nevada test site in Mercury, Nevada, that's what I learned, that what I found out. I mean, we're out there shooting everything. I was shooting up 4x4 chunks of wood. It was incredible. I was shooting up sand dunes. We're shooting up armor, shooting up everything. And what we learned and what we saw scared me. It scared us. And we had to do this to confirm and write, as you said, the Army regulations that govern how it's handled, how it's cleaned up, what you do, what are the medical requirements. And then it was totally ignored. And again, it comes down to it. We have a mindset in our nation now. We're attacking and destroying nations all over. We're killing and maiming and shooting everybody. And they've never attacked us. They've never done anything to us. And then we contaminate the air, water, and soil around them, make their food unusable. I mean, in the commentary...
But our own stormtroopers, I interrupted you. I want you to continue there, but go back to, you fire a 50 caliber rifle, let's just pick that weapon,
right,
with a DU round, what happens?
Well, take, for example, we had the U.S. Marines shot a 50 caliber DU round at the beginning of Iraqi freedom, and they destroyed an Abrams tank. Took everybody out inside of it and destroyed the tank. It was that simple. They destroyed an Abrams tank with a 50 caliber DU round. And got everybody inside, wounded, ill, sick, just a nightmare. And it continues on. What I hear day in and day out from people that are being deployed have come back. They've gone into areas where DU has been used, or they're using it. They were not provided the training. They were not given the medical care. They're not given the procedures. It's 40 hours of training.
They're given a death sentence. I mean, it's a death sentence.
Correct, it is, but it's a death sentence, not only for our military, and you bring it on back to the families, because the contamination has absolutely been brought back to the states and cross-contaminated within the military bases and off base. I personally want to confirm that personally by doing it for the Army. And then you get the spouses sick. I've had spouses that have sat right here at my table, 3 feet from where I am right now. They got cross-contaminated once the contamination came back with the same medical problems that I have. Absolutely identical.
Because it only takes a little bit.
The little bit, we're talking about nano amounts, amounts so small that you can't even see it. Because, see, the particulates, when this stuff is used, we're looking at extremely fine, smaller, less than a tenth of a micron. So there's no filtering that'll clean it up or take care of it or anything.
Stay there, Doc. We got to come back. This is amazing. Dr. Doug Rokke is our guest. Dr. DU. Pull up that headline for me. Came out about a month ago, London Independent. It was the British Medical Journal and others, and studies that have been done in Fallujah. Cancers and birth defects 14 times higher in Fallujah. That's London Guardian. Huge rise in birth defects in Fallujah. Iraq, former battle zone, sees abnormal clusters of infant tumors and deformities. Yeah, that's from a year ago. This one's about a month ago. It's a new major study. 14 times. Cancers increased 14 times in Fallujah. That should pull it up. But I mean, they know this. I mean, this is crimes against humanity that are off the chart. This is, from the studies I've seen, Doc, higher ratios than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Why is DU so deadly?
Well, because of the incredible amount of quantities. I mean, we used 370 tons of solid radioactive materials during Desert Storm. And then, so we did, that's Desert Storm, Gulf War I. That's just in a few weeks, all right? And then in 93 and 94, we used another 35 tons in the Balkans, all right? And I wrote the procedures for that. We used it in Somalia. And as we're getting ready for the Somalia, we wrote and got out in October of 1993 what's called, that's the primary medical directive for providing medical care to anybody exposed to DU. And that required medical care being provided, the radio bioassay done within 24 hours of exposure. Within 24 hours of exposure, not weeks, months, years later. Because what we do know, and when we wrote the medical procedures and all this other stuff, is if you wait for 30 days after you're exposed to DU and do a radio bioassay, that's your analysis, what you will find with all of the tests the military uses, either VA and the Army, they use the same lab, the same bad guys, it'll only be 1/1000th what's actually in the body. So so they deliberately delay the testing so that there is no medical evidence of it. And then what's there, they say, well, this is dietary. Well, this is not dietary. If it's never been in the diet, it's never going to be in the diet. And so we have a total nightmare. We have just a mindset of, well, these are extraordinarily effective weapons against all known targets. So we're going to use them. We're not going to give the troops the training. We're not going to give them the regulations that are enforced. And what's real interesting, today, the general that signed the Army regulation, that signed the original orders, going back to 1993 and then in 2002, is now the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, General Eric Shinseki. My attempts to talk to him and his staff and get them to acknowledge and do what's required, and for him to even confirm that they need to comply with what he wrote, he signed as a mandatory directive, even though I wrote it, meets with total failure.
The reality is, the use of uranium munitions thoroughly contaminates air, water, and soil. The reality is, the United States Army, in its common task training that is required for all military personnel to complete prior to deployment and every year thereof while they're in the military, states very specifically, if you go within DU, thou shalt wear respiratory and skin protection. Thou shalt provide medical care. Thou shalt clean it up. And it also states very specifically in that common task manual that uranium contamination makes food and water unusable for eternity. Now, if you know of the fine work of Karen Parker from up by San Francisco with the United Nations, that is one of the prerequisites, and that is one of the key reasons why the United Nations ruled uranium weapons of mass destruction illegal years ago. But my old bosses don't care. Because in March of 1991, you guys know who Tommy Franks is? Yeah. Tommy and Brown gave me a memorandum called the Los Alamos Memorandum. It was a direct order to lie about the adverse health and environmental effects of uranium munitions in order to keep them in the arsenal. The United States Department of Defense, the British Ministry of Defense, the Australian Defense, the Canadians know that uranium munitions are illegal. They know there is no known respiratory skin protection to protect anybody in their use. They do know that it's absolutely required by regulation and written orders that thou shalt provide prompt and effective medical care for all casualties, and that means not only U.S., that means enemy, because under Geneva Convention, when you blow up the enemy and they live and you get them, you got to take care of them. But you also got to provide it to all the civilians and non-combatants, and it ain't happening. They must shoot the messengers, because the message is very simple. The use of uranium weapons is illegal. Today, I made the choice some years ago to be a warrior for peace. Anybody want to join me?